And
this meeting is being recorded.
I'm just going to mute you, Gail, before we get into our presentation. And like I said, without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into our presentations for today. So first up, we have Madison Ball, Restoration Program Manager with Friends of the Cheat. And you should be able to share your screen now, Madison.
All right, does everyone see the slides on your screen? Just give it,
yes.
Looks like I've got some nods. Great, well then I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, Kristen, for the introduction. Today we're going to be talking about Lick Run of the Cheat River. This is now basically our largest contributor to acid mine drainage in the lower Cheat watershed. It is also one of our most challenging projects that we've faced to date. So I'm going to go over the history, describe some of those challenges, and also talk about, the future and maybe some potential treatment avenues that we've brainstormed. Just an overview. So that photo there, this is the mouth of Lick Run as it meets with the Cheat River in the background there. As you can see, it's a pretty good contender for the contributions of the different pollutant loads related to acid mine drainage, namely the iron that you can see deposited on the rocks. It's located in our lower Cheat watershed, just south of Kingwood, West Virginia. And this area, this watershed was extensively mined prior to the authorization of SMACRA in 1977. So this is considered abandoned mine lands. And so we're seeing a lot of those pre-law mining impacts in this watershed. Just a map to familiarize yourself. So the map on the left is a little bit zoomed out. We've got Kingwood and Albright there. This is the lower Cheat watershed. As I mentioned, the Cheat flows north. So Lick Run is actually upstream of Muddy Creek. I've got Muddy Creek highlighted in green. It is a watershed most of the folks on this call are probably very familiar with. Prior to the completion of the Muddy Creek watershed treatment facility on Route 26, Muddy Creek was our largest contributor to acid mine drainage in the Cheat watershed. So a lot of attention and money and efforts through our partners have gone into restoring Muddy Creek, and we're very excited to see that those efforts have paid off and that Muddy Creek is, for the most part, meeting water quality standards at the mouth based on our data that I'll go over later. But with the tackling of Muddy Creek, it now makes Lick Run our largest contributor to acid mine drainage, and basically our next big challenge. So the map on the right there, I've got all of our AMD seeps highlighted in red, those dots. So those are all different sources of AMD going through the Lick Run watershed, and then the sites highlighted in yellow. Those are some of the worst contributors within the Lick Run watershed. So those are, we call them the Lick Run portals, and I'll describe those in the subsequent slides. But there is a big cluster there, and they tend to have the worst water quality of those sources. Going into the history generally of the site. So like I mined extensively prior to 1977. In between 1977 and 2007, there had been different efforts from other entities to restore and reclaim this site. Notably, I think the Army National Guard in the 90s, the Army Corps of Engineers, not the Army National Guard, had pursued different projects in this area. But Friends of the Cheat, we did acquire the property, specifically those cluster of portals that I described in the previous slide. We acquired that property in 2007 for $1, which was a strategic effort on our part to be the landowner when and if the technology would exist in the future and the funding to treat this source. That would be just one less barrier to restoring this, the water quality here is not having to negotiate with a private landowner. So we would be the owner of the property. So We're no stranger to adopting or purchasing some of these problem areas for future efforts. So that was something we accomplished in 2007. And since then, in 2017, there was a land reclamation project that the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, their Office of Abandoned Mine Lands, pursued. In this project, you can see the photo on the right. That's one of those portals. The project was not to treat water, but more to stabilize the site and reduce risk of any sort of blowout or mine failure and release the pressure of the mines. Unfortunately, the photo below, you can see that formation there. The photo on the left, we call it the scab. And basically the water that has emanated from that portal, one of the 4 portals, is so highly concentrated that it has caused this formation, this buildup of different deposits here. And essentially, there was a lot of concern about putting a machine on that structure or that deposit to relieve the pressure and the potential for it to be catastrophic if basically excavated, because it's unsure of what might occur. So unfortunately, that last portal was not able to be reclaimed because of that. And here's a picture of that scab a little bit higher up that you can see that big deposit there in the portal. The photo on the left, you can see the portal where the water is emanating out of. And that's pretty much what it looks like today. The rest of the portals at the site look like the photo on the right, where they've been basically addressed and that water can flow out safely without causing any potential issues down the road. In terms of water quality, as I mentioned, with Muddy Creek being tackled and for the most part meeting its water quality standards, Lick Run is now our most significant contributor to acid mine drainage in the Cheat. This was more of a fun graphic. I've got some actual hard data that I'll go over here in a moment. This is just a fun educational graphic we made a few years ago. Using tons to show, Lick Run surpassing Muddy Creek. And this was a year, 2019 was the year, I believe, where the Muddy Creek treatment plant was not fully, it had not fully started to treat until midway. So this was an average of our data through the year, which is why you're still seeing some of that iron in Muddy Creek. Additionally, it's important to remember flow and just how potent the water in Lick Run is. The flow of Lick Run is much smaller. It's a much smaller watershed than Muddy Creek. So that just kind of highlights, and I'll show that later in the slides in our data, just how concentrated this water is, because Muddy Creek has flows sometimes 4, 5, 6 times higher than Lick Run, but yet now we have Lick Run, contributing these high levels of aluminum and iron. And so what does that mean for the Cheat? So these are some aerial shots taken in 2019. This is, where you see the this very dark red spot. That's the mouth of Lick Run, very small compared to, the Cheat River main stem. And in low flow conditions, this creates this crazy rainbow sherbet effect of, pollutants. So we're seeing, the iron fallout, the aluminum fallout. And what's really concerning is how this is compounded with climate change. So we know through other studies that we've partnered with NASA with, that the Cheat River in Preston and Tucker counties is experiencing more dramatic, high flows, but also low flows in drought conditions. And so when there's not enough water in the Cheat main stem to dilute the potent water that comes from Lick Run, we're seeing these effects. And, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that, this is, very huge impact for any sort of aquatic species living in this reach of the river. And I would argue essentially creates, an acid barrier probably for mobility of our aquatic species. So digging a little bit into the water chemistry and the water quality, I've pulled out, we do what we call our mouth sweeps. We do these twice a year. I did just pull one set, our most recent set in October as an example, but we do have a pretty extensive data set. If anyone is ever interested in that, please reach out to me at any time and I'm happy to share our data. So these are basically, we do these mouth sweeps. They're our most significant sources across the lower Cheat watershed. So we have several, but when you look at Lick Run, and you look at the flow and the concentrations, I mean, they are just astronomical compared to our other sites. I mean, we've got acidity in, the 600 milligrams per liter. Meanwhile, like I mentioned, our flow is relatively low when you look at a stream such as Muddy Creek or Bull Run, even Pringle and Morgan and some of these other streams. Our numbers in terms of concentrations are just really high when you relate it back to the flow. Dissolved aluminum is just extremely high, as is iron in this system. And like I mentioned, with Muddy Creek being treated, this was our data from our last round of samples showing that we're having, a non-detect sample for dissolved aluminum and iron. And we're actually having a negative acidity amount based on our independent lab calculations. So how that relates to loads. So right now, based on just the snapshot of data from October, we're seeing Muddy Creek contributing pretty much no, acidity loading, actually providing alkalinity. I didn't include alkalinity in the slide before, but we do have that data available. So actually, boosting the alkalinity in the Cheat main stem at the mouth. And then when it comes to our dissolved aluminum and iron, we have very minimal amounts. And we also have very high dissolved aluminum and iron for Lick Run. In terms of treatment options, this has been a really difficult site. It's very challenging because of these extremely high concentrations of pollutants. It makes passive treatment options very, very limited. There was a few years ago, we had hoped to secure funds for a potential pre-treatment option to potentially reduce some of the iron loadings in this site. But that unfortunately that didn't pan out. And when it comes to active treatment options, which seems like a better fit if we are going to actually completely tackle the water quality issues at this site, we have extreme challenges with topography. Lick Run exists in a very tight holler, so to say, and there's not a lot of flat ground to build a treatment facility. The one site in question is already being developed for our trailhead for the Cheat River Rail Trail. On top of that, there would have been a lot of challenges with piping that water to a treatment facility. And additionally, to put a treatment facility, right at the site with our portals, we don't have electricity. There's no sort of infrastructure at the moment to bring electricity up into that holler. It would all have to be, developed from the floor, from the bottom level. Funding obviously is a big challenge. Something like this would probably cost millions of dollars to not only construct, but then you have to think about long-term treatment maintenance and the cost, that is associated with maintaining a treatment site of that scale. So these are big dollars. These are millions of dollars. So it's a problem of a new magnitude for Friends of the Cheat. And in terms of the future, what does it mean for the future? We are hopeful. Like I mentioned, we do think it was a good move to purchase the property for future development. And it sounds like there is some hope on the horizon in terms of, the big infrastructure package and what that means for Lick Run, if there's potential to tap into those resources to address the Lick Run site. regardless of funding, it will take an innovative approach and thinking and likely partnerships among many groups to tackle this issue and design a site that, you know, is appropriate for the different elements at this site. So, and then there's also the exciting prospect of rare earth elements because of the high concentration and unique water chemistry at this site. It does appear that this could be a very lucrative site for the development of rare earth element extraction. But we know that that's very new and kind of a breaking edge. So we're just kind of waiting to see what that could look like for Lick Run. And with that, that's a summary of my presentation, and I'm open for any questions or thoughts. I'll wait to I think we're waiting to the end for questions, but if there's anything anyone wants to reach out to me individually, my email is Madison, MEDISON@cheat.org, and I'm happy to share any data or any information that we have regarding Lick Run.
Thanks, Madison. And I just dropped Madison's email into the chat so that you all can have it for your disposal and reach out to her about any questions in regards to the Lick Run site. We actually went out there last month, I believe, me, Jason, and Rachel, and it was amazing to be able to see everything firsthand. And I'm really looking forward to, one, exactly what this infrastructure bill money can do for not only terms of water quality, but brownfield side as well. So I really look forward to seeing how this project progresses into the future. Thanks again, Madison. All right, moving on into our next presentation, we have our own Jason Philhart that's going to be going into the Upper Buchanan River watershed. So Jason, the floor is yours.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Kristen, for that introduction. And today I'll be talking about AMD abatement in the Upper Buchanan. So this is going to include Swamp Run, Smooth Rock Lick, and Heritage Run, where we installed passive treatment systems, and I'll consider their construction and monitoring and a little bit of other information. So just a little bit of an overview. I'll start off with a little bit of the background, the site location, the individual sites with their project descriptions, benefits and goals, and also discuss some of our future projects. So a little bit of the background. In 2006, the National Mine Land Reclamation Center and Buchanan River Watershed Association partnered up to address the watershed pollution issues in the Upper Buchanan River watershed. After that partnership was established, we also have partnered with the DEP's Watershed Improvement Branch and the Federal Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement. So continuing with the background, the question is, why are these streams impaired and polluted? Of course, the main driver for pollution in the Upper Buchanan is the acid mine drainage. And much of this is from pre-Surface Mining Control Reclamation Act mining operations, so pre-law operations. So to address these issues in 2006, the Water Research Institute and the watershed group there, the Buchanan folks, decided to write and submit a watershed-based plan, and that plan was accepted, enabling us to work on these sites. So continue with the background, why we're addressing these. So Swamp Run is listed on the 303D list for biological impairment, Heritage Run for pH impairment, and then Smooth Rock Lick for both iron and pH impairment. In the TMDL, the cause is listed as unknown, yet we understand and know that the stressor and the impairment there is from acid mine drainage. And of course, this persists in those streams in the Upper Buchanan. So to date, we have installed 5 watershed improvement projects in the Upper Buchanan. They are Smooth Rock Lick 1 and 2, Smooth Rock Lick 3, Swamp Run 1, Heritage Run, and then finally Swamp Run number 2. A little bit about the project location. Map to the left there, you can see It is about 45 minutes southeast of Buchanan. And all these projects are located in Upshur County, West Virginia, approximately 2.5 hours from the Canaan Valley Resort. And again, about 45 minutes from Buchanan. And then the closest towns would be Alton and Alexander, which are very small towns there in Upshur County. And from a watershed perspective, it's in the Tigard Valley River watershed. And they are all small headwater streams which drain directly into the Buchanan. Getting a little bit more of a close-up perspective, as you can see from the map where these projects are located, they are near these purple shaded areas which indicate the occurrence of strip mining. The star there indicates right around the central location where all these projects are have been installed, and they're all within about half a mile to a mile of each other. All right, so getting into some of the project details, and to the right there is a limestone leach bed at Harrod's Run. But I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview of Smooth Rock Lick 3, which was our first project completed in 2010. A little bit over $100,000 for construction and engineering. This is a pretty small system. It's a limestone leach bed and a selling pond and a little bit of OLC, but still it has helped to reduce the loadings and increase the pH in Smooth Rock Lick. So we continued on with our Smooth Rock Lick operations with treating number 1 and number 2. This was a little bit of a larger project. We completed it in 2013 and around $250,000 for the engineering construction costs. So this really helped to decrease the overall loads in Smooth Rock Lick, and of course increase the pH. And some of our field folks were out there last week, so we don't have any of our analytical results back yet, but the field results indicated that we're just below 7 on the pH with a lower conductivity. Just some of the anecdotal evidence that the system is still working there. All right, so moving on to our largest project to date, which would be our Swamp Run number 1 project. This project was, again, a partnership between us and the Buchanan River Watershed Association and the Watershed Improvement Branch from the DEP contributed 319 funds. I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but a lot of these projects were covered through non-NPS 319 funds and WCAP funds from OSM. So they contributed to this project in a really large way. But the picture in the background that you can see there is, of course, at our Swamp Run number 1 site location. This is what we considered the iron mushroom. Martin Chris there from the DEP and Brady Gutta, one of our old project managers here at WRI, are in the background. But this was probably about 2 acres of an area here in the forest where the iron had the precipitates had spread over the soil and basically caused everything to either die or, of course, no new growth was occurring because of this iron mushroom terrace. So our system at Swamp Run number 1, we have 2 limestone leach beds. There's a large settling pond and then some smaller settling ponds. And then at the end, we have an aerobic wetland polisher. The top photo there shows one of our settling ponds that is actually turned into a small wetland, but you can see the aluminum precipitate from the flushing limestone leach bed just above that in that pond. The photo on the bottom, the pond in the foreground is our initial settling pond, and then we can split that water into 2 different limestone leach beds. The one on the left being the primary treatment, and then the one on the right being a secondary treatment if we have to divert the water from the larger pond for maintenance issues. So getting into just a little bit of the data here, as you can see, we have a pH in the raw water of about 3. And then by the time we're hitting wetland out, depending on if you're looking at the lab data or field data, we're between 6 and 7. Our limestone leach bed, we were actually getting a higher pH a few years ago. So I think that we have to go in now that this system's probably about 6 years old and stir that limestone in the primary limestone leach bed just to get more reaction and more treatment. If you look at our iron and aluminum loadings for the parts per million of aluminum, we're looking at about 22, and we're actually getting almost down to nothing on the outflow. A little bit lower iron in this system, about 6.7. We're getting down to 1.3, depending on if you're looking at dissolved or total amounts. And then the acid load, this is significant in this system. The raw water, we're looking at about 32,000 pounds per year. And then through treatment, we're actually getting a net alkaline level on the outflow. All right, so moving on to Herod's Run. This one was completed in 2018, just a little bit over 300,000 for construction and engineering. This system consists of open limestone channel. We have a few smaller limestone leach beds, and then again at the end we have a polishing aerobic wetland. We've definitely seen a great increase in pH here. We're actually hovering in between about 6.5 and 7 on the outflow. And also, of course, we're helping to reduce the pollutant loads entering Herod's Run. All right, so our feature project that we just completed would have been what is Swamp Run number 2. And this project was about $350,000 for construction and engineering costs. And this is our pre-treatment data, our pre-system data. So pH right around 4, acidity high at 226 parts per million. And then for this system, we had a lower aluminum content or concentration, but a really high iron concentration at about 82.4 parts per million on that. So moving on to our construction. So our constructed treatment raises the pH out of 2 AMD seeps, and then it of course reduces the amount of iron and aluminum in the runoff, most considerably the iron. And then we have following the final settling pond, the treated water flows into a small natural wetland before it enters Swamp Run. So you get a little bit of additional treatment just naturally because of that natural wetland. Again, construction concluded in November. We completed the iron oxidation terrace, flushable limestone leach bed, settling pond, and then we also have an open limestone channel, which we use as an emergency spillway during large storm events. This is a photo of our completed iron oxidation terrace. So the project partners went back out in the fall of 21 after the stormwater permit was closed. And again, you can note the revegetation from the previous slides. So that would have been that same area from below now in 2021. So everything was revegetated well enough to close the stormwater permit. And we also collected samples while we're out there. So our preliminary data, it appears that we're reducing iron from 94 to 99%. pH entering the system about 3.5, upon exiting it's about 6.1, and we're also seeing a reduction in total acidity with a rise in alkalinity. Getting into a little bit of the data here. Again, pH from the seep about 5.2, but by the time it hits the primary treatment of the limestone leach bed, it's about 3.5. And then on the average outflow, we're at about 6.5. And then we're also seeing a load entering the system of about 6,000 pounds per year. And then exiting, we're actually net alkaline in the system. Reducing, if we look at our load reductions, we're reducing acidity from 6,063 pounds per year to a net alkalinity. And then dissolved iron about close to 2,000 pounds per year, just a little bit of aluminum. And then we're also reducing manganese by about 87 pounds per year. All right, so discussing a little bit of the success here. So again, to date, 5 AMD abatement projects have been installed in the Upper Buchanan River watershed. Another project that we're going to work on, this is our future project, is going to be Swamp Run, increasing the size and the scope of Swamp Run number 2 to further remove pollutants. And then the Smooth Rock Lick projects have dramatically improved the water and stream health in Smooth Rock Lick. Once heavily degraded stream devoid of any significant aquatic life, the improvements have led to the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources recently transplanting native brook trout into Smooth Rock Lick. The early indications point to increased macroinvertebrate life, and then the introduction of the brook trout, that they are surviving, and that it has potential to become a viable native brook trout fishery. And they have actually located and through electroshocking young of the year for the native brook trout. All right, so some of our benefits and our goals. Our benefits are obviously the reintroduction of the brook trout into Smooth Rock Lick. And then of course we want to, along with that, the increased macroinvertebrate life in the streams. Some of our goals with these systems are to reduce the pollutant loadings from the AMD sources to the 3 tributaries by a minimum of 80%. We want to increase the overall pH in the tribs to above 5. And then through the introduction of the various wetlands within the systems, we want to provide beneficial habitat for migratory birds and other species. And then we'd also, with these systems, like to assist in restoring over 2 miles of streams, hopefully providing cold water sanctuary for trout migrating up the stream from the Buckhannon River. And some of our optimistic goals or benefits will be meeting the TMDL requirements for swamp herons and smooth rock, and removing each of them from the state's 303D list of impaired streams. We'd also like to see more diversification of benthic macroinvertebrate communities and restore suitable habitat and water quality to support native brook trout within these watersheds. And overall, with the introduction of these treatment systems, we really are looking to improve the water quality in the Buckhannon River, which is a significant trout fishery in the region. And I guess we're taking questions at the end, so thank you.
Thanks, Jason, for the really informative presentation. Yes, we are going to be taking questions at the end just to allow enough time for the next presentation. So Ken, definitely see your questions in the chat. Jason, I don't know if you want to address that, and we will just cover it at the end also so that everybody can benefit from the questions and of course the answer from those questions. But thank you again, Jason. It's really just great to see the remediation efforts and their success within the watershed. So great to see. And I think this is a great run into our next presentation from Jerry, our master's student at West Virginia University, who will kind of be going into an analysis on passive AMD treatments that we have seen already. So Jerry, the floor is yours.
All right, so I'm gonna share my screen. So, hi everyone, I'm Jerry Hu, and I am in the Department of Geology and Geography at West Virginia University. And I work with Dr. Chris Rosnello, who's also here. And my master's, today I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my master's thesis project, which is analyze of passive acid mine drainage system components over lifespan, seasons, and storms. So acid mine, a little bit of background about acid mine drainage. It's basically just acidic drainage rich in sulfate, iron, and aluminum, but also many other dissolved metals. And that's really bad for aquatic ecosystem in general, but especially fish, because of the high dissolved metal concentration and the high acidity. And northern West Virginia and western Pennsylvania, so this region in general, is particularly vulnerable to acid mine drainage because we have pretty high sulfate content in the coal. So here's a picture of, I took east of Morgantown, just east of Brookhaven. And as you can see here, we got some aluminum precipitate, the white stuff here, and the brownish red iron precipitate. And that's from an untreated acid mine drainage source. Here's a picture of an iron coating at one of the remediation sites here, actually one of the site I'm working at. And as you can see here, you at pH above 3, you have iron precipitate forming right here. But at pH lower than 3, iron precipitate doesn't really form. So if you see like a clear looking river, it doesn't necessarily mean that stream is not affected by acid mine drainage. Instead, it could be it just has really bad acid mine drainage to the extent that pH is lower than 3. And this is a stream contaminated, typical stream contaminated by acid mine drainage in Pennsylvania. So passive treatment system. The reason we're interested in looking at passive treatment system is because it's really common in this area. It's a very cost-effective way of treating acid mine drainage. We also have some active treatment systems here, but those are more expensive. Takes a lot more manpower and money to maintain. And passive treatment systems do need regular maintenance and inspection to make sure it functions as it was designed. So that's important here. But many of the systems in this region are old and lack maintenance. So that's something we also want to look at. How long does those systems actually do they last, and what kind of efforts can be put into to renovate those systems? So two kinds of passive treatment systems: biological ones use wetland, those use bacteria induced chemical reaction to neutralize the acidity. And then we have geochemical systems, which is what I'm interested in. Two kind of systems I'm especially interested in, open limestone channel and limestone leach bed. And I'm gonna introduce you to those systems in the next slide. So here is a treatment system design chart. As you can see here, we have limestone leach bed and open limestone channel here. So why were those systems designed in this way? The reason that we have open limestone channel is usually because those systems work really well for steeper slope, and the flushable limestone leach bed is really great for if the acid mine drainage has high dissolved iron and aluminum concentration, because when you have a flushable component, you can get rid of the iron and aluminum precipitate quick, so it doesn't clog the system. The one that doesn't have a flushable component, the limestone leach bed that doesn't have a flushable component, so you can see right here, that's usually used to pre-treat the water before it goes into other components, because it's really great for very low pH, like pH lower than 3. One thing you might notice about this system is this design chart doesn't really take seasonal storm variation into account. And that's what we really want to look at. How does the seasonal and storm variation affect the treatment efficacy? So open limestone channel, some of you might be very familiar with this, but I'm just gonna go over it again. So open limestone channel is basically a limestone channel that's lined with large dimension limestone. And as you can see here, we have water coming in here into the channel, and the water goes through the large dimension limestone, and during that process, the acid gets neutralized. So we will end up, ideally, when the water comes out of the outlet, we end up with a much higher pH. And in turn, we will also have the dissolved metals precipitated out. So results in overall improvement of water quality. Open limestone channel, just like other passive and active system, needs regular maintenance. And the way we maintain it is by flushing it during high precipitation event, get rid of the accumulation solid and the coating, but also expose the fresh surfaces. So once in a while, we have to stir it a little bit to get rid of some of the coating and to make sure we always have fresh surface exposed for neutralizing reactions. Limestone leach bed. So limestone leach bed it's usually built in a small basin. So you usually have this inlet or pipe coming in, and you have smaller limestone lying in here. So, and then after it's been treated, the water will come out from the outlet. So the the way it works is the chemical reactions are pretty similar to the ones in OLC. The difference is a lot of limestone leach bed have a flushable component. So you have water coming in and flush it once in a while, sometimes every 24 hours or like a regular time interval. And that would help get rid of the accumulation in solid. So that's especially great if you have high dissolved iron aluminum that prevents the system from being clogged. The reason we're interested in seasonal variation is you can see here, this is the USGS data for the Cheat River, which is a bigger river, but that reflects the general trend in this area. As you can see here, we usually have lower discharge in summer months because of high evaporation, and we have higher temperature in summer months. And all of those factors would affect the chemical reactions. And in turn, we would get a different water quality and different treatment efficacy in different seasons. So as we know that flushing, as I mentioned, flushing of those passive systems sometimes helps get rid of the coating and accumulation in solid. So that's one thing that's interesting about seasonal variation. If we have a high precipitation event or higher flow in general, there is a chance the system might actually work better in that kind of condition and works and doesn't work as well in a base flow condition. Also, just acid mine drainage, if we go back to the chemistry, if you have a submerged system, if the acid mine drainage source is submerged, it won't oxidize, so it doesn't have any surface to oxidize. There's a chance it doesn't have any surface to oxidize. So in that case, we won't have as much acidity coming out of the source. So that might help with the water chemistry too. So those are some factors we want to look at. And if we take those factors, if we get a result and take those factors into account in future design, definitely hopefully it'll help with the future design of acid mine drainage treatment systems. So here's how we're gonna do it. So we're gonna sample our sites, which open limestone channel and limestone leach bed sites of different ages. We're gonna sample them every month, and we're also gonna do storm sampling. So if there's a high flow event, there's like a really heavy rain and we have higher flow, we're gonna go out to sample. And we're gonna look at some pretty typical water chemistry parameters like alkalinity, dissolved metals, and also the hydrological data, which is the discharge and temperature. So one thing we want to look at, another thing we want to look at is the rare earth element concentration. There has been a lot of interest in extracting rare earth element from acid mine drainage, but there's not been a lot of research done on if we actually build a plant and keep extracting it, how the seasonal or storm variation is going to affect the concentration of rare earth element. And after that, we're going to do a little bit of geochemical modeling. So hopefully we'll be able to correlate, for example, discharge. If we have discharge, we know the discharge and the pH, hopefully we'll be able to correlate the dissolved metal concentration. So if we have a system that we just cannot, for example, due to landowner access issues, so we just can't monitor it constantly, then maybe we can use this to get some of the data without actually going to the site. And after that, we're gonna present the result to watershed focus group and also the general public. Here are the locations of the sites. So we have a real road graphics, which is both the open limestone and limestone. It has two components, open limestone and limestone leach bed. And we also have ingrain mine, which is just a limestone leach bed. And we have Jessup here in its open limestone channel, and depends on some of the data we get, we might add one more limestone leach bed site just to get a better idea of how aging affects those systems. And as you can see here, they are all in Cheat River watershed. So first open limestone channel set, we have this this one is managed by Friends of the Cheat, and it's part of, it goes into the Pringle round. It's completed over 10 years ago, so it's pretty old. And at this point, it doesn't function as well as some other sites, just based on the recent water chemistry data. Pretty low pH, pretty high acidity. Railroad refuse, another one that's managed by Friends of the Cheat, much newer system constructed in 2015. And this one, you have a pH of 5.1, and that doesn't even include the wetland treatment. So once the water went into the wetland, the water coming out has a pH of over 7, so that's really good. Pretty low acidity in general, but the wetland is very effective. So is the open limestone channel and limestone leach bed component. Another limestone leach bed site we're looking at is the Ingram mine, and this one is managed by Friends of the Deckers Creek, and it was completed in 2016. So again, a very new system. Field pH, we just went out to take some field data yesterday, and we got 5.65 coming out of the limestone leach bed. And the system also has a wetland component. We didn't get to take data yesterday because it was frozen, but we know that after the wetland treatment, the pH is probably even higher than 5.65. So that's also a system that functions really, really well. And we're gonna run rare earth element analysis on our samples, probably every 2 months or 3 months. And we want to look at this because rare earth element right now is in very high global demand. It's expected to increase. A lot of the newer environmental friendly technologies like electric cars use rare earth elements. And we know that acid mine drainage water is a really good source. The sludge is a really good source for rare earth element because it's environmentally friendly. It doesn't disturb any land. It doesn't need removal of material or anything like that. So rare earth element, we also know rare earth element concentration is correlated to dissolved iron and aluminum concentration. So if we think that dissolved iron and aluminum concentration varies by season because of our hydrological and temperature condition, then we can also reasonably induce the fact that rare earth element concentration probably also vary by seasons. That's why we want to look at it. And as you can see here, this diagram shows the total rare earth element concentration and percentage of critical rare earth element in different sources. And coal mine drainage treatment solids actually perform surprisingly well. So here you have the best. Those are the ones from actual mining. But that, again, the problem with our actual mining is we don't have that much in the US, and it disturbs a lot of land, needs a lot of reclamation after you mine it. So it seems like coal mine drainage, after the actual mining, coal mine drainage sources are actually pretty good compared to other possible sources of rare earth element. You have pretty high critical rare earth element content, which is the one we actually use frequently in the industry, and relatively high rare earth element concentration in general. And I would like to acknowledge, I'd like to thank some of the people that make this research possible. This research would not have been possible without the generous funding from USGS, all of the professors on my committee, and the WVU Hydrogeology Lab, and my wonderful colleagues in the Hydrogeology Lab and WRI Water Research Institute, and 2 watershed focus groups that are doing really excellent work here in Morgantown. Thank you so much for being here, and take questions now.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, we do have a couple of minutes. So I want to open the floor for anyone that has any questions or comments for Madison, Jason, and Jerry. It looks like we do have a couple of comments and questions in the chat. So I'm just going to jump to a couple of questions that we had for Ken, from Ken to Jason in regards to the presentation for the swamp run remediation. Ken was asking what grade or size of limestone rock was used in the swamp run remediation.
So generally in the limestone leach beds, we use size 2 to 3s. Any larger, like size 4 or 5, you just don't have the surface area for good reactions. Any smaller, like chips, you have a lot of surface area, but then you also get clogging with the precipitated metals in between those chips. And then I believe he asked about the stirring of the limestone and the remediation pond. So it's not necessarily that stirring really reactivates everything, because you're reactivating whenever you flush the limestone through that flushable system. It's more so that we will, by stirring it, we're going to introduce new rock that has not been, or new limestone that hasn't been activated or reactivated within the system, because that limestone leach bed, the large one at Swamp Run 1, we have about 1.5 feet of rock that is above the water level. So we want to stir that in and get some new rock mixed in. And then also these systems, no matter how well you design them, you create preferential pathways within the beds. So there's probably some material underneath that isn't as activated or hasn't been activated as much as the other material. So that helps to basically introduce new material into the bed through that stirring.
Thanks, Jason. And it also looks like Brandon ended up leaving his email for you, Ken, in regards to the sharing some videos and photos of stirring, if you're interested. Of course, that would be a good resource, an additional resource. It doesn't look like I have any other questions. Of course, a bunch of comments in regards to the great presentations today. That goes without saying. The presentations, as always, in these virtual seminars are just so informative, and it makes me really look forward to seeing how the projects continue to progress in the future. We are at the top of the hour at this point, so I do just want to open the floor up really quickly to anyone that has any last comments or questions for the day.
I actually have a comment, Kristen.
Sure, yeah.
I just wanted to admit that I noticed an error in my slides. So the Muddy Creek loadings, those dissolved aluminum and iron, that should have been non-detector 0, as well as the acidity. I am just back from Belize on vacation, and I apologize for my rusty editing skills. So
no problem at all. It's the vacation day.
apologies.
You have to have a couple of days before you can like jump back into it. No problem at all. Thanks for the clarification, Madison. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Madison, I was going to say regarding everything with Lick Run, now may be the time to maybe nudge the DEP about the getting that watershed-based plan sent up the chain to the EPA. You know, I don't know how significant that's going to play a role in our ability to treat there, but I'm certain that it wouldn't hurt if that were an accepted plan. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we should plan to meet in the near future, and we can get that rolling.
sounds good.
Great. I love it. Every time we have a session, I feel like we're making connections the entire time. So it's great to see. Well, thank you all again. Thank you to our presenters, to our attendees for being here with us this morning. We hope that you found this informative session, once again, extremely interesting and beneficial. While today is the last session of the winter virtual seminar series, don't forget that you can always go back and review any of the sessions on our YouTube channel, or you can always stay connected through our WVWRI Facebook and webpage. Thank you again, and I hope you all have a great rest of your Thursday and a great weekend ahead. We will see you all soon. Take care, everyone.